So today we're going to be talking about how to differentiate between an authentic emotion and an emotional flashback. Probably worth upfront defining the terms. An emotional flashback, broadly speaking, could be said to be any emotion that is not an appropriate or proportionate response to a situation that is here and now in this reality, but it is actually based in trauma from the past. That would make it disproportionate and inappropriate to what's going on now. Emotional flashbacks, I guess, is kind of like a catch-all term for PTSD based responses, and I guess is another way of saying emotional dysregulation, or the manifestations of being emotionally dysregulated. Emotional flashback is a term that comes from complex post-traumatic stress disorder, from work done by Judith Herman and by Pete Walker. It's an emotional flashback to distinguish it from a standard PTSD flashback. A standard PTSD flashback typically would have a singular causation, or a causation or incident that we could identify singularly, and a singular or series of singular responses. So the causation would be singular, identifiable, and the responses would be singular in the sense of being discrete, as being separate from each other and identifiable. The flashbacks, as an acid flashback would be, or any psychedelic flashback would be visual, auditory, and kinesthetic. So in a typical flashback, when we're talking a drug flashback or a combat veteran's flashback, a loud noise over there would sound like a gunshot or an explosion. My body, my brain would re-experience gunfire, and I would flash in a flash backwards in time, back to the time where I was under gunfire. I may hear gunfire, I may smell cordite, I may see the flash of the firing of automatic weaponry, and I may feel physical feelings. Maybe I can feel the stock in my shoulder, or maybe I can feel the body armor I wore, and I would feel the emotional feelings of that experience of being under gunfire. That would be a typical flashback. If it was a drug flashback, you would have a conversation or an experience or hear a piece of music, and if it had been from acid, you would start to trip again. You'd start to re-experience the experience. You would flash in a moment, you'd be back in the drug experience and see things through the psychedelic lens. So that would be a standard flashback. So it's singular to the extent that it's based on a singular experience. There's that one time I went down to the park and I took acid, or there's that one time that I was in a war zone, I was in a battle zone, and this incident took place. The emotional flashback, as distinct to that, is typically around pluralities rather than singularities, where there are no discrete boundaries either between the stimulus or the causation of the trauma or the response. They are a multiplicity of responses. This makes it complex. This is the complex part of complex post-traumatic stress disorder. The causation is complex, multiple, and the response is complex, multiple, plural, and it's not discrete. The different responses are not discrete from one another. And so it's complex for the person enduring it, and complex for the therapist working with them, trying to parse this, to pull this apart and go, okay, which bit goes where? It's complicated, it's complex. So the difference between a standard flashback, flash to bang, bang goes off over there, somebody drops a breadboard in the kitchen, I re-experience being back in a war zone, or I hear a certain song and I start to re-experience what it was like when I was on acid. I might start to see, your visuals go a bit funny, those colors are more vibrant and everything seems to echo as it moves, vibrating as it moves. That would be a standard flashback. So this is an emotional flashback from complex causation and complex manifestation, and it is defined as being solely emotional. There's no visuals, there's no weird trippy visuals. I'm not seeing the flash of gunfire. I'm not hearing what I heard when I was in that situation, feeling what I felt, seeing what I saw, and re-experiencing the same emotions again. There's no visual, auditory, kinesthetic. I'm only remembering the emotional content. So these flashbacks are purely emotional. They are not rooted in a visual, auditory, or kinesthetic re-experiencing. So I'm flashing back in a flash, I'm going backwards in the past, flash back to the emotion. If I was a political prisoner and I don't know, some awful scenario had played out whereby I'd become completely infantilized due to the pressure of torture and interrogation, and my ego boundaries were broken down to the point where I was trauma bonded to my captor, I may have felt extreme feelings of helplessness and shame that I was so dependent on this person at the time. So if I went back into an emotional flashback to being a political prisoner, I would not know the causation, or it would be hard for me, it would be complex for me to see the causation of that. It wouldn't be like a breadboard being dropped or a song being played. It could be a context. The context makes me feel helpless. It could be, you might go from being a political prisoner to 10 years later being in a job interview to work at the post office. And something about that makes me feel under pressure, makes me feel interrogated. Perhaps the job interview seems like an interrogation, and I flash back, but only emotionally, to the experience of feeling helpless, and then I start to feel a tremendous amount of shame, for example. That would be a purely emotional flashback. That's why it's complicated. It's complex. It's hard for the person experiencing it. It's hard for the therapist who's working with them to try and just pull it apart and be like, okay, where does all of this go? So you are only re-experiencing the emotion in an emotional flashback. How do you distinguish that from authentic emotions? Is the question. Complicated subject, 7.5 minutes, and I still haven't actually started answering that question. Let me start my answer by saying this. If you find that this question resonates with you and you've asked it yourself many times, allow me to be presumptuous. I may be a stranger on the internet to you. You may have just come across this video, you've never seen me before in your life. So forgive me for my presumption. It is, please explore the possibility that due to your experiences in life, if you're asking this question and you're like, I don't know what's an authentic emotion, I don't know if it's an emotional flashback, that you yourself have become quite emotionally numb. This is fine. It's not an accusation. It doesn't make you a bad person. I'm not condemning you. But if you don't know whether you're feeling a real feeling, if you struggle, let's take this further. If you struggle to know the difference between thoughts and feelings, if you struggle to know the difference between your feelings and other people's feelings, if you struggle to know the difference between where you end and other people begin, then please do seek the help of a qualified specialist in this field, not more YouTube videos, not more help from online communities. You can end up really chasing your own tail, really getting very confused and being given advice, often with the best of intentions, is not going to lead you anywhere. It's not going to lead you towards healing. If this question resonates with you, then it means it's highly likely that you become emotionally numb, and that you probably became emotionally numb. Again, I'm being presumptuous here, but there's a good chance that you've become emotionally numb because of a lot of ongoing experiences in your life that were just too hard for you to deal with. And a good survival mechanism, a good, effective survival mechanism, when we're under a lot of pressure, is to turn off our emotions so that we can survive, so that we can escape. I don't want a nuanced smorgasbord of various, degrees of emotion if I'm in the middle of an armed robbery and I could die. That's a really good time for me to switch off my emotions. If there was a nuclear war and I survived, the first few days after that, I would want to be fairly emotionless, and I should be fairly emotionless while I simply focus on surviving, getting shelter and getting calories. That should be all I focus on. Many of us are raised in environments where it is so abusive, so psychologically and physically abusive, that we experience it as the human animal, as though we are in a survival situation, as though we are living through a violent revolution, a nuclear war. What was the other example I gave? An armed robbery, where the threat is immediate and physical. We're experiencing that way because our I do speak English. Our adrenaline levels, our cortisol levels are being spiked all the time. We're being told by the environment, there is great danger here, you may die, over and over and over again. And thus we become emotionally dysregulated and emotionally numb. Yay! Once you become emotionally dysregulated through a massive amount of trauma and stress, and you have started numbing yourself to your own feelings in order to survive, you will eventually become emotionally illiterate. If you are emotionally illiterate, you literally lack literacy, sorry for the people who English isn't your first language, around emotions, meaning you cannot easily name to a nuance what you are feeling. You cannot name with sophistication what you're feeling, and you can't distinguish between your different emotions, and you're probably struggling to tell which emotions you're feeling about what and whom and why. Everybody, every human being is on this spectrum of emotional illiteracy to emotional literacy. There's no such thing as a perfect human being. There's no implicit model of psychological super health that I'm putting forward here. Everybody's traumatized to a degree, and everybody is numbed emotionally to a degree, because we have to be, in order to survive life on Earth. It's a difficult, traumatic, painful, disappointing, frustrating, depressing, angering experience. Living as a human being on Earth, it always has been, it probably always will be until we evolve into, wispy floating creatures with one eye there. And that's fine. So just be stoic, cynic about that, and just accept it. Life is hard. It always has been. The world will seem to you to be malformed, or you could take a Gnostic view and be like, well, this world there's something essentially wrong with this world, whatever you like. Fault, imperfection is part of you. It is part of life. It's part of reality. Don't chase an ideal that you're supposed to be perfect and life is supposed to be perfect. It's not. It never has been. Not for anybody. Not ever. Not even once. Not even for a second. So we can just drop that burden and just go, okay, my life is imperfect and I'm imperfect just like everybody else. Great. We're all on a scale of emotional literacy to emotional illiteracy. Emotional aliveness to emotional numbness. Emotional numbness, as I've said, and I will say again, is necessary and it is useful in survival situations. But as any good psychologist will tell you, any good counselor will tell you, especially if they're focused on trauma and recovery from trauma, the things and the mechanisms and the strategies that helped us to survive during a traumatic situation, if they are taken from that moment forward into our lives, into our present and into our future in the timeline of our lives, the things that saved us, literally saved us, will destroy us further down the road. If you struggle to know the difference between an authentic emotion and an emotional response from dysregulation caused by trauma, you probably are quite emotionally illiterate. You probably lack good internal boundaries. This is not a judgment, it's not a condemnation. I'm telling you so that you can know, there's a weakness in the chain. If you were a corporation and I came in and I did an assessment of it and I said everything is great, but this department is doing this and you're losing money that way, you would want to know. If you came for strength training or skill training and I said, everything is great, but you should know this part of the chain, of the kinetic chain, is weak. If you focus on it, if you strengthen it, everything else will get stronger and things will be better for you. You'd want to know, right? I'm letting you know now that there is a little numbness, a little blind spot, a little weakness here in the system that is you. that probably need some work. And it's not so hard to do the work. So what I'm trying to present to you here is like non-judgmental, don't get into the weeds over whether that means you're a weak person or a strong person. There's no condemnation here. It's a systemic issue. It happens when trauma is present, and it happens to everybody. And every human being on the planet is on a sliding scale. There's no perfection. There's no perfection you should aspire to. Don't aspire to be perfect. Just aspire to be better. Don't aspire for a perfect life. Just aspire to a more peaceful, saner one. That's going to serve you far better. Please trust me on that one. Sanity, normality, balance, peace, go for them. Hedonistic fulfillment, perfect life, trying to convince everybody around you that your life is better than theirs and making them jealous. All of these things are neurotic. And in a karmic sense, in a Buddhist sense, if you set out to do something with a neurotic intent, all you will create is more suffering, more dukkha, as the Buddhists would say, in your own life and in other people's lives. So don't bother. Try to bring sanity to the space. Try to bring yourself back down to earth and the people around you back down to earth, because it's not good to live in illusion. It's not good to be trying to live outside of yourself or trying to live somebody else's life in somebody else's way. It will make you very sick, mentally, emotionally, and ultimately physically. So come back to reality, come back to your own life, consume less social media, consume less, just consume less, would be my advice on that subject. So back to the question, how to know? Well, if you're telling me that because you've been living in a cave for 2 years, that your eyesight isn't that good, we can't just jump to how do I distinguish between the color yellow and the color green. If your eyes are now adapted to low light conditions, we have to bring them back to being in brighter light conditions first. And that would take time. You'd have to recover. I'm not an ophthalmologist. I don't even know if that's possible, what I just said. If you can do it, maybe the eyes are permanently damaged. So that would be a terrible metaphor. I don't think that they would be. I think they would come back, but it would take time. And everything takes time. Everything is a process. Everything, it's going to either cost you in time, or it's going to cost you in money, or it's going to cost you both. But it's good to know up front that it's going to take time, so that you won't try it for a week and be like, oh, I'm not fixed. There must be something wrong with the system, or there must be something wrong with me. No, it's going to take a while for this to come back. If you've been living with your emotional systems in offline mode for a long period of time, clicking them back on is going to be tricky, because the system will resist that. We'll say, well, why? First of all, why do I need that? Why do I need my emotions back? Let me tell you why you need them. When you're emotionally numb, your ability to perceive reality is very warped. When you're emotionally numb, it's likely you'll also be very emotionally dysregulated, because your emotions, when you're numb and suppressing them, are not functioning, they're not flowing in the way that emotions should. What you actually end up with is not so much emotions and emotional content and emotional expression, and more just responses, more just the reactions of, sorry to use a slightly graphic analogy, but it's like constipation. The system is supposed to flow. If there's a lot of backed up emotion because you've said, I'm not going to express, we went Freudian, didn't we? I'm not going to express emotion out. I'm going to stop that and hold it in. Well, what happens? There's going to be a lot of backed up emotion. So if you're very emotionally numb and very emotionally illiterate, you will become emotionally dysregulated, because where's the emotion go? It's a part of you. It's a part of you, like your hands are a part of you, your feet are a part of you, your eyes are a part of you. You can bind your hands. You can say, I don't have hands. You can put your hands behind your back for years, and eventually your body will freeze that way. It will atrophy that way. But you still have hands, and it will make you sick. You still have emotions. So you need your emotions, because if you don't express them, you'll become emotionally dysregulated, which means you'll become very reactive. If you're very emotionally dysregulated, your ability to perceive reality warps tremendously, which means that the likelihood of you being possessed by the more destructive elements of your unconscious or your shadow go through the roof. You also become very, very impressionable if you're emotionally numb. You'll be very impressionable, you'll be very easy to con, very easy to scam, you're very much more likely to fall prey to fraudulent propositions, cults, cult leaders, predatory types, narcissists and psychopaths. Because if you're not really experiencing your emotions, you're never really here, you're never really present. You know, this big thing, it's probably past now, it became massively popular about 15 years ago, to be mindful and to be present, as though that was the be all and end all. And I met a ton of people who were being mindful, but they were just there in the minds, they weren't there in their emotions. So they're being present with the conscious mind and practicing. The mind was getting stronger. Meanwhile, the emotions are just getting ignored, and they're getting more and more suppressed, and they become more and more dysregulated, and they start to say and do stranger and stranger things, and they start to make stranger and stranger attachments to things and people. That leads them to addiction, it leads them to denial, it leads them to extremely turbulent attachments with other people, with family members, and even with strangers, because they are emotionally dysregulated, emotionally numb, and they're not really living in this reality. They'll start to, over the years, if it goes on for a long time, they start to descend into a kind of just straightforward madness, psychosis. They're living in a fantasy. They're living in a self-perpetuating downward spiral of a fantasy that over time has less and less to do with the coordinates and cues from real reality, and more to do with the fulfillment of the darker, well, I shouldn't say darker, the more negative elements, the more destructive elements, the more chaotic elements of their own shadow. Because they're living in darkness. Because how can you live in light if you are cutting off a major part of your perceptual system, which is your emotions? How can we be, again, that's 15 years ago we had mindfulness. 25 years ago, the big, I think I'm right saying this, 1995, the big thing was emotional intelligence. Are you emotionally intelligent? Can you train your employees to be more emotionally intelligent? It was a bit of a fad. Wasn't all that sciencey, to be honest. Wasn't backed by a tremendous amount. But there definitely, I think we can say, there is an effect or a factor called emotional intelligence. And I think that if people are low in emotional intelligence, even if they're very, very high IQ, they can say and do stupid, self-destructive things, and they can be tricked, and they can be impressionable, and they can be duped very easily. Because if you're not emotionally present, you're not really present. If you're not actually feeling and processing and acknowledging your emotions, you're stultified, you're constipated. And what's that? How's that different to saying that somebody is, we talk about people who are traumatized, that they're frozen at the moment of their trauma. So they're infantilized by the trauma, and they never mature. You cannot mature if you're not experiencing your emotions and acknowledging them and honoring them. What do I mean by honoring the emotions? This sounds very American and schmaltzy. Honoring your emotions. Well, don't dishonor them. If you throw your emotions in the toilet and you say, I don't need these are stupid, these are annoying, these are ugly, they hold me back, they make me weaker, they take my time, well, that's dishonoring your emotions. So by saying honoring your emotions, I don't mean you have to light candles and do big maps with cutouts from magazines of everything you felt that day and cover it in glitter. Though for some of us that would probably really, really actually help. You don't have to do that. I'm just saying don't dishonor them. See your emotions as messengers. They're there to let you know what's good, what's bad, what's safe, what's dangerous, what's going to help you, what's going to hinder you. I think that the culture we live in now, the times we're living through now, we're massively, massively traumatized, and people are very emotionally illiterate, which makes them very emotionally dysregulated, which makes them very, very impressionable, very naive, woefully naive, and very easy to trick, very easy to control, very easy to manipulate. If we could deal with our own feelings, we wouldn't have all the problems that we have in the mental health world with anxiety. If we could deal with our own feelings, we wouldn't have anywhere near as much depression as we do. Depression is a natural result, a natural side effect of smothering your own feelings. It's not the only cause, and depression is a word that describes a number of a number of things that human beings can experience that probably are significantly discrete from each other. Yes, they overlap, but they are different effects that we're calling, and all of these different effects we're calling depression. Same with anxiety, we're calling all of these different effects and all of these different experiences, or mental illnesses if you like, anxiety. It's like a blanket term, it's a hold-all term, depression, anxiety. But within that, there are different causes and there are different experiences. Anxiety, different causes, multiple causes, and multiple expressions of anxiety. So again, here we are. In a certain sense, I would even go so far as to claim that psychology itself is emotionally numb, is not emotionally literate, and is emotionally numbing. It encourages you, there's no it, but say the system of ideology, the coordinates it offers us to think about trauma and human suffering and how to recover from it, encourages numbness. It encourages you to put yourself in a box. What are you actually experiencing? I don't know. It seems to be like what you guys are all calling depression, so I call it that. And very often if you sit down with somebody and you pull it apart and you try to introduce some literacy, so you literally try to introduce more words to describe their experience better, more fully, in a more sophisticated, more nuanced way. It's not just, oh, I'm depressed. It's, I'm disappointed that my needs were not met in this area of my life. I'm actually really authentically sad about this experience that I went through that's outside of me. I'm not mentally ill. I'm living through a sad period of my life and I feel sad. Wow. Do we want to call that depression? Will we call grieving depression? I don't want to derail this video, but I find these questions interesting. I don't think we ever get away from culture and the way in which the culture binds the way we experience these things and talk about them. Many things that are completely legitimate, we've pathologized. Getting upset, getting angry, oh, you've got a real problem. Says who? Oh, you're sad. Oh, that's a problem. You must have a problem. You must be mentally ill. You're upset. That's a problem. Oh, you're feeling a feeling. Well, just feeling a feeling is a problem. You can't feel feelings. That's not okay to feel a feeling. That's who we are. We're living in this weird, psychopathic, anti-human ideology that crushes people and it crushes humanity itself. You're supposed to feel. It's okay to feel. You should feel. Your emotions are messengers. They're there to serve you, not to hurt you. All of them. Even the ones we've learned to deem as ugly. Anger, jealousy, envy, whatever it is, it's there to serve you. I'm not saying act on every emotion. That wouldn't be reasonable. That would be poor form and could even potentially be illegal. But you should at least acknowledge that you do feel things, that it's okay for you to feel things, and that you will honor the emotions and try and find out what they're communicating to you. Assume intelligence. Do not assume pathology. Assume good intent. Don't assume neurosis. Assume a forward viewing, forward focused modality of being. Don't assume a past focused, trauma bonded way of operating in the world. Because you're not like that. The human animal that you are is optimistic. The human animal that you are is designed for survival, yes, but also thriving, and also full expression, and also peace and harmony, and for feeling good and being in the world in a way that you find satisfying and that allows you to contribute to other people. Emotionally numb people, emotionally dysregulated people struggle to contribute because they are an open wound. They're a walking wound. Their ego is wounded and they can't get away from, none of us get away from the ego. So you walk around as a wound and you're very self-obsessed and you're continually trying to end your pain via any means necessary other than facing and processing your emotions in an authentic way. So the way I do it, when I'm looking at this, I'm saying, was this an authentic emotion or is this an emotional flashback? Is I ask myself, how do I feel? How do I feel? What am I experiencing somatically right now? Do I feel guilty, nervous, ashamed? Do I feel in my body? Am I out of my body? What am I experiencing within body? Not emotions, but somatically. How does my chest feel? How does my back feel? How does my face feel? I've got this down to the point where I even get feelings in my ears somatically around certain emotions and certain stress situations. I get a certain feeling in my ears because I tune in. Instead of blocking it out, I tune into my body. I'm like, okay, body, okay, emotions, okay, millennia of evolution. You're obviously trying to talk to me. You're knocking on the door. I can either lock the door and turn the music up. So locking the door is going into denial, saying I don't feel anything somatically in my body or in my emotions. Turning the music up is trying to entertain myself, or maybe take drink or drugs or something that stops the wound, that stops the pain, that stops me from feeling. Or I could say, hey, you know what? That knocking on the door is actually quite annoying because, the emotional system that we have is persistent and loud and repetitive. I'm just going to let them in. I'm going to let them in and I'm going to say, what? What do you want? What do you want, jealousy? What do you want, guilt? What do you want, anger? We talk a lot about the negative emotions because we seem to not have a massive problem. Well, some people have a big problem accepting positive emotions for multiple reasons, and it's the same thing, it's emotional literacy. But the big issue, the priority issue, the urgent issue is the lack of acceptance of negative emotion. And I just say, what do you want? What are you trying to tell me? The biggest one that I learned from is guilt and shame. If I feel guilty about something, if I feel ashamed of something, why? Why? Talk to me, emotion. Where's this coming from? What are you trying to tell me? What do I need to look at? Where's my shadow? Where's my blind spot? Where's my unconsciousness? What am I in denial of? What have I suppressed? What do I not want to look at? What am I scared of that I'm turning away from? What would damage my self-image or force me to face some uncomfortable situation that I don't want to do because it's uncomfortable and I want to be comfortable? It's not a crime to want to be comfortable. It's not a crime to be scared of your feelings. It's not a crime to not want to feel bad. You want to feel good. That's okay. That's cool. But the emotions will still be there. And living in denial of them is really destructive for you, and it's really destructive for the people around you. So I look at my body. I tune into my body. I say, what am I feeling? When I'm feeling an authentic emotion, whatever it is, the somatic experience of that is day to night, totally different from an emotional flashback. An emotional flashback is more like a conditioned and / or an addictive response, because I think, I certainly saw it in my life, I think I had become addicted to certain emotional flashbacks. They had become so integrated into my life. They were a coping mechanism. They were part of my mode of being in the world. They were part of moderating my own state, my own anxieties, my own energy levels even during the day. So I'd become addicted. I'm also conditioned. I was also conditioned by the emotional flashbacks. So am I coming from an addicted, conditioned place where I have to feel this way? I must respond this way. I must react from here defensively, because it's all from survival. Or am I being authentic, present, and in my body and feeling a feeling whilst my consciousness doesn't really get sucked into the whirlpool of feeling? So my consciousness is still, I'm not lost. I'm not lost. My ego, the ahamkara, is still present. I'm still here. I'm really angry, or I'm really disappointed, or I'm really sad, but I still am here. In an emotional flashback, I wasn't there, I was gone. The only thing that was left was the emotion. My personality would change, my beliefs, I've figured this out. not that long ago. I mean, I think it was like 2014, 2015. I was like, I believe different things when I'm in an emotional flashback. My moral system changes. My boundaries shift when I'm in certain emotional flashbacks, when I'm in certain archetypal super states of emotional flashbacks. I believe a different thing. My politics shift, my moral system shifts, my belief system, my reality tunnel shifts. And I'm not really there. The emotional flashback possesses me utterly. So there's no ego present. There isn't actually a person there for you to reason with or talk to. There's only raw, unbridled emotion. Flashback. Emotion that's sorry, it's not, to be clear again, when I say there's raw, unbridled emotion, it's like stultified emotion, frozen emotion that's coming out in a disproportionate and not appropriate way. When I say inappropriate, I'm not doing the judgmental, that's inappropriate thing. I'm saying that there are situations where it's appropriate for you to get really, really angry. There are situations where it's appropriate for you to be very, very fearful. Totally appropriate. Like if somebody comes into the house at 4 a.m. with a knife, you should be fearful. And if you have kids in the house and you're going to fight them off, if you flew into a murderous rage to do that, I would say that's appropriate. Why did you fly into a murderous rage? There's a guy with a knife in my house. I got kids in the house. I don't know, he might kill them. So yeah, I flew into a murderous rage and I had the strength and the courage to beat that person and then call the police. Never do anything illegal. Always use reasonable force under any situation. But that would be appropriate. When I'm driving, and I'm back in 2015, I'm flashing back in my head now to a visual, auditory, kinesthetic memory that I had when I was dealing with my emotional flashbacks, as emotional flashbacks. There was a situation where I was driving through Heswell, which is in the Wirral. Heswell's a nice area and it's got a lot of old people who live there. And a guy slowed down to make a right turn and he made me slow down so that he could turn right. And I flew into a rage. It wasn't a murderous rage, but it was only 2 clicks below a murderous rage because he made me slow down for 7 seconds. That's it. And I looked at as he turned, I looked to see through the car, and it's some guy who's like 85 with you know, the cap on and the big glasses like this. And in my head, I'm like, that guy's probably, he could be in the, I don't know, he could be in the situation that many old people are in where there's nobody who can take care of it. He doesn't want to drive, he's frightened driving, but if he doesn't go to the shops, if he doesn't go to the supermarket to buy food for him and his wife, there's no food in the house. Could be, I don't know. There's no reason for me to get into a rage because somebody made me slow down slightly. There's no reason. That's inappropriate and it's disproportionate. Somebody breaks into the house, that level of rage and murderous intent could save my life. Could save the life of my kids. It's appropriate and it's proportionate to the situation. Always use reasonable force, kids. So the question of the delineation between whether I'm coming from trauma or whether I'm coming from non-trauma is a great one, and I'm glad that people are asking it. Many people have asked me this. But if we are asking it, it means that we should have a look at where we are in our healing journey, where we are actually up to today. We might not be as far ahead as we thought because we're doing everything. We're doing mindfulness, we're dunking ourselves in cold water, we're running naked through the woods, we're burning candles, we're taking ayahuasca or whatever else, but we're just not looking at our emotions. We're just not with our emotions. We're not present with them. We're not talking to them. We're not asking ourselves regularly, how do you feel? We're not checking in and say, how do you feel, kid? Oh, I don't like this. Oh, okay, tell me more. Which is what the emotional literacy exercise does. It says, hey kid, how are you? How are you feeling? I'm feeling a thing. Okay, you feel a thing. It's okay for you to feel a thing. What's the thing that you think you're feeling? I think I'm feeling really angry. Okay, and if I asked you to add more words, more literacy to that, so that you could describe to me with greater nuance, so that I can understand what you feel, what words would you use? I don't know. Okay, well let's get out one of these emotional color wheels that you find on the internet, or a list of emotions. You said you're angry. Are you indignant? Are you irritated? Are you defensive? Are you da-da-da? Are you da? And you go, oh, I don't know. Oh, no, I'm probably actually indignant. Great. Let's write that down. Let's start with anger, and then we break it down to indignant or irritated or whatever, because that's all really good data. That's really good information that you should know about yourself. Because otherwise you'll start making strange assumptions about yourself and about the world. Every time somebody slows down in traffic, I'm just really angry. Well, what would you conclude from that? Maybe you'd walk away from that concluding you're a bit of a nut job or a bit of a dickhead. You know, that's what I did. I was like, I just must not be a very nice person. But when I broke it down as to why I was feeling that way, and also had a conversation with myself about how that's just not an appropriate, I know I am being judgmental with the word appropriate, an appropriate way for an adult to live. You can't just go through life throwing temper tantrums, being angry with people as they go about their business for the smallest inconvenience they offer you. You need to calm down and get some perspective. So the way to distinguish, I would say, is a question that you're asking when you're already sort of behind the curve, and it's probably too soon to ask that question. First of all, I think, so if you say to me, how do I distinguish between an emotional flashback and an authentic emotion? I would say, okay, by asking that question, you're telling me you're emotionally numb. Why don't you go and try the emotional literacy exercise for a month? Do it every day, spend half an hour on it, just half an hour. Maybe you won't hit it every day. Maybe if I say every day, you'll do it 4 times a week. And you'll end up doing it 16 times in a month. And just tell me how you feel after that. Tell me if it's helped. If you just sit there and even just ask yourself the question and just acknowledge non-judgmentally, I feel things, I feel emotions, I do actually feel things as I go about my life. And even in just the space of acknowledging that you feel a thing and that is okay, maybe your consciousness will open up to the point where you can say, aha, that's a conditioned response, a knee-jerk reaction, an emotional flash back into the past. This is how I actually feel today, and that's okay. But you can't do that if you're in denial of your emotions. You'll never do that. You'll never go, this is okay. Today I felt rage. Today I felt love. Today I felt peace. Today I felt jealousy. All of it's okay. Acting on jealousy, acting on rage is not okay. These are internal boundaries, not external boundaries. People who are very emotionally numb, people who are very emotionally dysregulated, lack internal boundaries that allow them to distinguish between a thought and a feeling, one feeling and another feeling, one thought and another thought, a thought and a person, a feeling and an action that took place outside in the world, and a long enough timeline when everything is sort of corroded by the ooze. If you remember Who Framed Roger Rabbit, the ooze that breaks down all boundaries, that breaks down all walls, and that makes everything the same schlop, you will become, over time, more and more dangerously close to being fully psychotic. Because how are you supposed to function in the world when you're just lost in your own emotional responses, projections, unconsciousness, anima possession? How are you going to function? You're not. You're going to function very poorly in the world, and then you'll experience pain, and you'll become bitter and resentful, and you'll say, life is tough, people are cruel, which life is tough and people can be cruel, but that's not why you are where you are. You are where you are because you lack internal boundaries, because you are not owning how you feel. Please own how you feel. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your time and your attention. I hope that was useful, and I look forward to speaking to you again very soon. Cheers.